My name is Steve. I'm turning 46 this year. I work in sales at the American branch of a Spanish electronics manufacturer. I've always enjoyed my job, where I can use my Spanish skills that I've been good at since my school days. It's fun and very rewarding. When I was younger, I spent about 3 years assigned to our headquarters in Spain, and I've been back several times for training and business trips. Because of my busy life, I never had time for romance, and without many chances to meet someone, I remained single well past 45. But last year, fate stepped in. On my way back from visiting a client, as I was walking down the main street in front of the station, a tall man walking in front of me suddenly collapsed. He was clutching his abdomen in pain and groaning. I rushed to his side and crouched down, asking, "Are you okay?" But when I looked at his face, he seemed like a foreigner. Then he spoke to me in Spanish. "My chest hurts. Please call an ambulance." "Understood. I'll call one immediately." I responded in Spanish too and dialed 911 on my cell phone. While I was on the phone, a woman approached us. "What's happened here?" She looked to be a classy woman, about 60 years old. "This man says he's having chest pains," I explained. Then she spoke to the fallen foreigner in Spanish. "I'm a nurse. Can you tell me exactly where and how it hurts?" After that, she neatly placed her rolled-up jacket under the man's head and checked his pulse while asking about his condition. When the ambulance arrived, she explained the man's condition in detail to the paramedics and accompanied them in the ambulance. Watching her take charge, I thought she was pretty impressive. I saw her again when my dad, who lives alone, was hospitalized for colon polyp surgery. She was the nurse in charge of my dad's room. "Hey, you're the one from the other day. Oh my, thank you for that time." It seemed she remembered me too. "Thank you for that time too. You were a lifesaver. Was that man okay?" "Yes, because you called the ambulance right away," she said with a bright smile. "You're really good at Spanish, aren't you?" "Not really. It's all self-taught." "You studied Spanish by yourself?" "Yeah, I've always loved watching movies and foreign TV shows, so I got interested in Spanish. I learned by watching language programs on TV and buying books." "That's impressive. It seemed like you could speak Spanish too." "Well, I work for the American branch of a Spanish company, so I can speak a little." "Really? Have you ever been to Spain then?" "Yes, I have." She too had been to Spain on a trip. After that, we started talking every time we saw each other. Her name was Michelle, and she was about to turn 60. She was a cheerful person with a lovely smile, and talking to her was so enjoyable. I always wanted to chat more. Looking back, I realize I was totally smitten with her from the first glance. The age difference didn't matter to me. She was such an attractive woman. In our conversations, I learned she was divorced and currently single. Michelle has a daughter, but she's married and has left the house. So, I figured it wouldn't be a problem to ask her out. With that in mind, on the day my dad was discharged from the hospital, I asked her for her contact information. She readily agreed, and we exchanged numbers. Then, right after I got home, I asked her out to dinner. Since then, we've had dinner together several times and gone to the movies. The more I learned about her, the more I was drawn to her charm. She was kind and considerate to everyone, always bright and positive, and whenever I was tired from work or had something bothering me, talking to her would cheer me up. After about 6 months of dating, I proposed to her. "Michelle, will you marry me?" When I showed her the ring I had prepared and told her my feelings, she looked at me with her big, teary eyes and said, "Are you sure an older lady like me is okay? Age is just a number. I've got my heart set on you, Michelle. I can't imagine being with any other woman. I want to live the rest of my life with you," I said as I took her hand, and she began to cry. "Thank you. I want to spend my life with you too, Steve," she answered. And with that, she accepted my proposal. She had decided against having a wedding ceremony, but when she turned 60 and retired from her nursing career, I seized the moment to take a 10-day vacation. We went on a honeymoon to Hawaii. This trip was not only a celebration of her 60th birthday but also her retirement, so we really went all out. We stayed at luxury hotels and ate at 5-star restaurants. Since I'd been single until I was 45 and didn't have any expensive hobbies, I had a good amount of savings. That's how we managed to go on such an extravagant trip. Michelle was overjoyed. Seeing her having the time of her life, like a young girl, I knew it was worth it. Returning from our trip, about 6 months into our married life, one morning, as usual, I headed to work and was called in by my boss. The president of a major client from our headquarters in Spain is coming to America with his wife for a trip. We'll be hosting a dinner reception, so please attend with your wife as well. My boss, Director Frank, said that and then specified the date and time. I'll let you know the venue once it's decided. Understood. As I was jotting down notes in my planner, Frank suddenly laughed. Ha! Well, I've heard you got yourself a wife. I was starting to think you'd end up a bachelor for life, but good for you for finding a woman with such unique tastes. Those scornful eyes were staring at me. Frank is only 2 years older than me, but his pride and joy has always been his much younger and beautiful wife. And he's always taken every chance to mock me. Stuff like, you must be lonely being single at your age, or there's no way a woman with any sense would want to marry a guy like you. He's looked down on me forever. But to still be hearing this kind of taunt even after I got married. I was fed up with it, but kept my silence. Worried that my wife would be subject to some unpleasant comments if I introduced her to such a boss, but since it was an order, I had no choice. We would have to attend. On the day of the dinner, I took Michelle to the designated restaurant. It was a high-end place for Italian cuisine. When I mentioned the name of the organizer to make our reservation and was led to the private room, there were Frank and his wife. Frank had every reason to brag. His wife indeed had the beauty of a model. Sorry to keep you waiting, Frank. As I greeted him, my boss Frank looked over his wife, who stood behind him, and said, "Steve, why did you bring your mom along? I thought the deal was you'd bring your wife." Hearing that, I felt my blood boil. Frank had a spiteful smirk at the corner of his mouth. He probably knew exactly what he was doing, saying it on purpose. Harassment like this is almost a form of art. That's not my mother. Let me introduce to you. This is my wife, Michelle. Michelle, this is my boss, Director Frank. Oh, my apologies. You're his wife. I mistook you for his mother because of your distinguished appearance. Frank continued with such rude remarks. Glancing over, I noticed that Michelle was giving a strained smile while remaining silent. She was forcing a laugh, but I bet it was hurting her on the inside. I couldn't forgive Frank for hurting my wife. If he dared to say something that insulting again, I resolved to hit back hard next time. After a while, our client from the headquarters, Richard, showed up with a young employee as his guide. "Nice to meet you. I'm Richard. Excuse me, but my wife Emma is currently in the restroom, so I'll introduce you to her shortly." Richard said that in Spanish. Frank and his wife, as well as Michelle and I, all introduced ourselves in Spanish. It seemed like Frank's wife wasn't very good at Spanish. Apart from stating her name, she barely spoke, and whenever Richard asked her something, Frank answered for her. In contrast, Michelle, whose Spanish was fluent, was happily chatting with Richard. Seeing this, Frank and his wife looked displeased. "Anyway, Steve, how did you get up the nerve to marry a woman so much older than you?" Frank started speaking in English abruptly. No matter how well she speaks Spanish, what's so good about a lady that looks her age? Everyone knows younger women are preferable. Or maybe you've got a thing for older women. How old is she, anyway? Frank was speaking his mind without restraint. Indeed, Michelle did look her age at 60, and certainly didn't look young. But she had a beauty that comes with age, and her personality was wonderful. That's why I fell for her. To have her ridiculed with such harsh words, it felt like a complete denial of my love for my wife. "Boss, don't you think that's incredibly rude?" I said, my fist clenched and shaking. "What? You're going to talk back to me, your boss?" Frank said with a smirk. Richard, who didn't understand English, looked puzzled. "There are things you can and cannot say, even as a boss. He can say whatever he wants about me. I've been ready for it since I married you," Michelle said as she tugged at my sleeve. That's when it happened. The private room's door opened, and a foreign woman escorted by an employee came in. "Emma, over here, everyone. Let me introduce you to my wife, Emma," Richard said, standing up. Emma was a tall woman, around 60 years old. When she took the seat next to Richard, she glared at Frank and began speaking in fluent English. I heard what was being said. "I am very displeased right now. Apologize to them immediately," she demanded sternly, leaving Frank open-mouthed and frozen. "I'm also 9 years older than Richard. What's so wrong with a wife being older than her husband? The notion that a woman needs to be younger to be appreciated is repulsive to me." Emma was fuming. Frank turned as white as a ghost. In a panic, he bowed his head to Emma. "I'm terribly sorry." "Not to me. Apologize to him and her," Emma said, still angry. Then Frank turned to me and my wife and bowed deeply. "Steve, and to your wife, I'm terribly sorry for my rudeness. Please forgive me." Unaware of the situation, Emma told the whole conversation to Richard in Spanish. Richard's face turned red with anger. "What a rude man you are. I don't want to dine with someone who speaks so thoughtlessly. I'm leaving." It was Emma who calmed down the fuming Richard, who had shouted in Spanish. Well, he has apologized, so let's forgive him." "No way, I can't forgive him. Please leave now and never make such comments again." Richard's anger did not settle, and Frank, still pale, went home with his wife, looking downcast. Then, we introduced ourselves to Emma again. "Pleased to meet you. I'm Michelle, the wife of Steve Richardson." Hearing Michelle introduce herself, Emma's eyes widened. "Michelle, are you Michelle Richardson?" "Yes, that's me." "Oh, my God. I'm Emma Anderson, your email friend." Excited, Emma switched to speaking in Spanish. "What? You're Emma?" Michelle also looked incredibly surprised. The two of them joyfully clasped hands over this coincidence. Listening to their conversation, it turned out they had met on an internet forum and had been exchanging emails for over 20 years. Michelle had taught Emma English, and Emma had been teaching Michelle Spanish. So that's why Emma could speak English. Michelle was too shy, so they had never done a video call before. It seems they didn't know what each other looked like. What an amazing coincidence, though. To meet an email friend from overseas like this, and at such a place. The party really got going with Emma and Michelle's conversation at the center. The food brought out was delicious, and Richard and Emma enjoyed it too. Man, what a great day. I can forgive Frank's remark, but I'm truly happy that Emma and Michelle met by chance. Richard had also heard about Emma's longtime email friend before. "I've really been looking forward to trying authentic Italian cuisine, and I'm totally satisfied. I'll be sure to tell the folks back at the headquarters in Spain about this." After the meal, saying this, Richard left with Emma. It seems the dinner was a success. Later that day, back at home, Michelle said to me, "Steve, thank you for standing up to Frank earlier. I acted tough, but if you had gone along with Frank, it would have really shocked me. I'm relieved and glad that you stood up to him." Of course I'd stand up to anyone. I can't tolerate anyone talking awful about my dear Michelle. But, Michelle, you said you were prepared for this when we got together. I had no idea you felt that way. Gotta admit, it was a bit of a shock. But we have a 14-year age gap. I don't exactly look young, and to outsiders, our age difference is pretty obvious, right? I was braced for some remarks. It was a relief that your parents didn't object and were supportive of our marriage. So that's what it was. You needed that kind of resolve to marry me. Still, thanks for marrying me, Michelle. Don't mention it. The happiness I feel being with you makes all that trivial. Michelle said this with a bright smile. Seeing her smile, I fell even deeper in love with her. A few days after Richard returned to Spain, my company called to say a major deal with his company had gone through. Richard had made a point of sending his regards to me. Apparently, Richard had also reported Frank's nasty comments to the headquarters, and as a result, Frank got demoted to a regular employee. And in his place, I was promoted to department head, effectively reversing our positions. Since that day, Frank stopped making condescending remarks towards me. He became utterly submissive, and seeing him bow was incredibly satisfying. Michelle and Emma continued to exchange emails and calls, staying good friends. It looks like Michelle is now planning a trip to Barcelona where Emma lives. Watching her talk excitedly about it, I want to protect that smile for as long as I can. I want to make her happy. That's what I thought.